The year is 1944. The front lines of the Second World War are a churning, desperate morass of mud and steel. Every infantryman knows the simple, brutal truth: without fire support, you don't last the hour. And of all the weapons that save lives in close-quarters combat, none is more beloved or more essential than the mortar. But what happens when that lifeline, the heavy, reliable M260 mortar, is not just delayed but utterly gone? What happens when a fighting unit faces annihilation, armed only with rifles while the enemy closes in? 038. This is the story of a desperate innovation, a forgotten chapter of ingenuity born from necessity under the severest duress. This is the moment when U.S. engineers needed mortars in a hurry. They built 40 from water pipes until the enemy found out. 100. The place: the unforgiving, rugged terrain of the northern Apennine Mountains in Italy. The date: late November 1944. The unit: the 34th Infantry Division, the Red Bull Division, locked in a savage, grinding battle against entrenched German Fallschirmjäger paratroopers in what would become known as the Gothic Line Offensive. They were pushing hard, but their supply lines were a nightmare. Background: 130-500. 130. For the men of the 109th Engineer Combat Battalion attached to the 34th Division, the war was defined by problem-solving under fire. Their mission was never to be on the front line but to keep the front line moving, clearing mines, building bridges, and repairing the supply arteries shattered by the Wehrmacht. But in late 1944, their role changed. The division had advanced so quickly and suffered such heavy losses that the critical flow of replacement weapons, especially the M260 mortar, had stopped. 215. The M2 was the infantry's personal artillery. Light enough to be carried by a squad, it could drop high-explosive shells on enemy positions hidden just 100 yards away. It was the answer to machine gun nests and sudden counterattacks. Its absence was a death sentence. 245. The situation was critical. The infantry regiments were reporting that their mortar platoons were down to half strength, with many of the remaining weapons damaged or simply worn out. The relentless German defense was exploiting this weakness, launching punishing attacks that the American GIs had no effective way to suppress. The engineers were bivouacked well behind the lines, near a small, bombed-out fabrication yard in a rear area maintenance depot. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel George K. Bell, was a man of action, not bureaucracy. He received the desperate report from the front: "We need mortars. If you can't get us new ones, build them." 340. This was an impossible command. A mortar is a precision-machined weapon built to withstand the immense pressures of igniting a propellant charge. Building one in a field workshop with salvage was madness. But Bell and his chief armament specialist, Master Sergeant Frank C. Riley, knew they had no choice. They had scrap, welders, and an inventory of common plumbing and drainage pipes meant for camp construction. 415. The strategic stakes were immense. The 34th Division was the spearhead of the Allied advance toward the Po Valley. If they stalled, the entire offensive would halt, costing countless lives and extending the war into another brutal winter. The deficit of fire support was not a logistical inconvenience. It was a strategic catastrophe waiting to happen. The engineers were about to attempt a feat that defied military doctrine. They were going to try and build their own artillery. Building tension: 500-1500. 500. Riley gathered his team, a mix of former civilian welders, mechanics, and plumbers, in the depot's dimly lit workshop. He laid out the M260 mortar specifications, focusing on the three essential components: the barrel or tube, the bipod, and the baseplate. 535. The barrel was the biggest challenge. It needed to be strong enough to contain the explosion of the mortar round. They scoured the salvage yard. What they found were lengths of heavy-gauge, seamless steel pipe, originally intended for large-scale water or steam lines. The internal diameter was, by sheer chance, close enough to 16 to offer a chance. 615. By 900 hours, November 22nd, the first prototype was taking shape. The men cut the heavy pipe to the appropriate length, about 28 inches. For the firing pin, they welded a simple, fixed bolt deep inside the base of the pipe. The mechanism for firing the shell was the simplest design possible. The shell would be dropped down the tube, striking the fixed pin and firing instantly. 650. The bipod and baseplate were easier but still demanded intense fabrication. The bipods were jury-rigged from angle iron and adjustable turnbuckles, salvaged from truck parts to allow for crude elevation and traverse. The baseplates were fashioned from thick boiler plates hammered into a slightly concave shape to distribute the recoil. They looked crude, but were they safe? 735. The first live fire test was a terrifying moment. A single shell was gently lowered into the pipe mortar. Everyone took cover. There was a sickening thud followed by a loud but surprisingly contained whumph. The shell flew, arced high, and landed 250 yards away, close enough to military specification to be considered operational. The pipe held. 8:15. Little did they know that their small, secret project was about to become the division's only hope. 8:35. Up on the line, the situation for the 133rd Infantry Regiment was deteriorating rapidly. They were dug in near a village called Monte Casello, holding positions against 3 companies of German paratroopers, estimated at nearly 400 hardened enemy troops. The Germans were well supplied with MG-42 machine guns and the dreaded 120 Granatwerfer 42 heavy mortar. The lack of American return fire was emboldening the enemy. 9:30. German records later revealed that their intelligence had quickly noted the lack of the distinctive thump of the M2 mortar. They correctly deduced that the American infantry was out of close-range support. This wasn't just a tactical edge, it was a green light for a full-scale counterattack. 10:00. By 1400 hours, November 23, the German assault began. The air was thick with the scream of incoming 120 shells, each one kicking up massive plumes of dirt and shrapnel. The American lines were being systematically pulverized. The radio reports crackling back to headquarters were desperate. Taking heavy casualties, enemy closing to hand grenade range, cannot hold without immediate fire support. 10:50. Back at the depot, Riley and his team had managed to fabricate 15 of the pipe mortars. They were clumsy, heavy, and lacked the aiming precision of the M2, but they could fire a 60 shell. When the urgency of the 133rd's plight became clear, Bell knew the time for testing was over. 11:35. He ordered every available truck to be loaded with the 15 pipe mortars, along with a reserve of 60 ammunition, which mercifully was still available. A small team of engineers under the command of Sergeant Thomas J. Davies was tasked with getting the improvised weapons to the front. They were now mortar crews. 12:15. The convoy's journey was a nightmare, over shell-pocked roads through driving rain with the constant threat of German ambush. Davies knew that every minute cost American lives. The mission was no longer engineering, it was a race against time and overwhelming firepower. 12:50. For the engineers, their greatest fear was not the enemy fire but the possibility of a catastrophic failure in their own weapon. If the pipe barrel burst, it could kill or maim the entire crew. They had used their own hands, their own sweat, and their own limited supplies to create these weapons. They were entirely responsible for their safety and their function. 13:30. Davies and his 12-man crew reached the forward supply point at 1800 hours. They met with the remnants of the 133rd Regiment's mortar platoon, exhausted, shaken men who regarded the clumsy pipe weapons with a mixture of skepticism and profound relief. The men of the 133rd had been fighting for 8 brutal hours with almost no fire support. 14:20. The Germans were now concentrating for a final night push, sensing victory. They had successfully infiltrated 3 forward observation posts to direct their 120 fire with deadly accuracy. The American line was bending, about to snap. The infantry needed the immediate morale-boosting impact of incoming high explosives. They needed the pipe mortars. The crisis. 15:00-22:00. 15:00. The sun had dropped, leaving the battlefield shrouded in a bone-chilling mist and absolute darkness. The sounds of combat were amplified. The constant chatter of the MG-42, the metallic clank of a shell casing, the screams of the wounded. The air smelled of burnt cordite and wet earth. 15:45. Davies and the few remaining mortarmen split the 15 pipe mortars among the most threatened sectors. Because the weapons lacked the fine-tuning mechanisms of the M2, they had to be aimed by a crude process of trial and error, adjusting the angle by literally shoveling dirt under the baseplate or using rocks as shims. It was a primitive, desperate method. 16:30. The German commander, confident in his intelligence, ordered a massed assault on the American center. 3 full rifle companies, over 300 men, moved forward in a coordinated charge. The sound of their advance, the crunch of boots on frozen ground, was audible to the American GIs who were now lying prone in their foxholes, their rifles held ready. 17:15. The American infantry, out of anti-personnel grenades and down to their last bandoliers of rifle ammunition, prepared for the worst. This was the moment where the odds shifted from difficult to impossible. The German machine gun fire intensified into a continuous, unbroken stream of tracers, pinning the Americans down completely. 17:55. Davies ordered the first volley. It wasn't a coordinated barrage, it was a desperate, staggered attempt to disrupt the German formation. Whumph, 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 the pipe mortars coughed out their payloads. The noise was different from the M2, a deeper, more muffled sound, but the result was the same: 16 high explosive landing right in the path of the advancing German troops. 1835, the first shells fell short, kicking up soil near the American positions. Davies quickly adjusted, shouting directions over the din. The next set of shells landed dead center. The effect was immediate. The German charge, so confident moments before, stalled as the lead platoons were hit by the unexpected blast of shrapnel. 1915, this was the moment the enemy found out. The German advance ground to a halt. They were confused. They had been assured the Americans had no mortar support. They had been told to exploit the gap in fire, but the fire was there, and it was deadly. 1950, the German forward observer, lying just 200 yards away from the American lines, radioed back, "Enemy is firing new type short-barreled mortars, highly effective. Request immediate counter-battery fire." The Americans were, for the moment, saved by the German confusion. 2025, but confusion quickly turned to deadly focus. The German command redirected 2 companies of their own heavy 120 mortars to neutralize the new American threat. The fire coming back was astronomical in its volume and lethality. Shells now rained down on the American positions, seeking out the source of the improvised fire. 21:05, Davies and his crews were subjected to a torrent of counterfire. They had to fire, adjust, load, and then immediately dive for cover. The crude baseplates offered no stability, forcing the men to muscle the pipes back into position after every shot. The pipes themselves were becoming dangerously hot. One of the men, Private First Class Angelo Rinaldi, noticed a dangerous bulge forming near the base of his pipe mortar. 21:40, he immediately recognized the danger. The metal was stressed to its breaking point. He was forced to abandon his position, leaving his makeshift artillery piece behind. The crisis was deepening. The German counterattack was stalling, but their counterfire was accurate and the American pipe artillery was starting to fail. The turning point: 22:00-27:00. 22:00, by 2300 hours, the American line was a patchwork of desperate resistance. 3 of the 15 pipe mortars had failed completely, 1 tube had split, injuring its crew, and 2 others were abandoned due to concentrated German fire. But the remaining 12 were still firing, slowing the German advance 1 whumph at a time. Davies received an order from the 133rd Regiment commander. They needed an immediate, overwhelming concentration of fire on a small, ridgeline bunker, Bunker 5A, that was anchoring the German defense with a relentless MG-42. Taking out the bunker meant breaking the attack, but hitting a small target with crude, zero-precision pipe mortars was an impossible task. 23:25, this was the heroic decision. Davies and the 2 surviving mortar squad leaders, Sergeant John L. Miller and Corporal Ben A. Tarrant, huddled together. They decided they would not aim for the bunker individually. They would attempt a coordinated, sustained 10-shot volley from all 12 remaining mortars. 24:05, the plan: they would adjust their tubes to the maximum elevation they believed they could achieve while keeping the shell trajectory relatively stable. They would then load and fire all 12 weapons in the span of just 30 seconds, creating a focused, miniature barrage. The danger was immense. Miscalculated pressure or a flawed weld could turn any of the tubes into a pipe bomb. 24:45, Davies gave the command, "Fire, fire," for effect. 25:00, the next 30 seconds were a sustained, deafening roar of frantic activity. Men dropped shell after shell, ignoring the heat of the barrels and the proximity of the German counterfire. Whumph, 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 the metallic sounds merged into a single rolling thunder. 12 mortars, 120 shells. A relentless, brutal rain of high explosive landed directly on the ridgeline, concentrating on the area around Bunker 5A. The impact was devastating. The German bunker, designed to withstand rifle and machine gun fire, was not prepared for a sustained, focused barrage of 60 HE shells. The area around it was obliterated. The German machine gun fire stuttered, then went silent. 26:15, the German infantry, already disorganized by the sustained, unexpected fire, saw the destruction of their main strongpoint. Their morale shattered. The order came down from the German command to pull back. The massed counterattack, which should have crushed the 133rd Regiment, was over. The line had held. Resolution and Legacy: 27:00-30:00. 27:00. The sun rose on November 24, 1944, to reveal a smoking, ravaged battlefield. The counterattack had failed. The 133rd Regiment had suffered terrible casualties, but they remained in position, having blunted the German drive. The estimated German losses from the mortar fire were significant, with over 50 confirmed dead and scores wounded, many clustered near Bunker 5A. 2745, the hero of the day was not a rifleman but a welder. Lieutenant Colonel Bell immediately ordered his engineer team to continue fabrication. Over the next 4 days, working around the clock, Sergeant Riley and his team produced a total of 40 fully operational improvised pipe mortars. 2820, these weapons, affectionately dubbed the Plumbers Special by the GIs, served the 34th Division for the next 3 weeks, plugging the critical fire support gap until official replacement M2 mortars finally arrived. The sheer ingenuity of turning scrap pipe into battlefield artillery became a widely shared legend among the troops, an epic testament to the resourcefulness of the American soldier. 2905, the pipe mortars were eventually retired and discreetly destroyed to avoid official reprimand. After all, they were non-standard, improvised, and inherently dangerous weapons, but the men who built and fired them were officially recognized. Master Sergeant Frank C. Riley and Sergeant Thomas J. Davies were both awarded the Bronze Star Medal for their exceptional bravery and technical brilliance under the threat of combat. Their innovations saved a frontline regiment. 2940, the official military reports simply mention that fire support was restored. But the truth lies in the hands of the engineers. They didn't wait for supply, they manufactured their own salvation from plumbing scrap and in doing so repelled a superior enemy force. Outro 3000-3100. 3000, the story of the Plumbers Special is a profound reminder that innovation often follows desperation, and that the greatest victories are often won not just with courage but with ingenuity. The M260 mortar was a fine weapon, but it was the $5 worth of salvaged pipe that saved the day on Monte Casello.